all week, of course, we've been watching that conflict turn over the markets. Let's get into how this is playing out in the U.S. with Matt Gertken, Chief Geopolitical, U.S. Political Strategist, BCA Research. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
The big question seems to be right now, is there an off-ramp for Washington? Because it's still not clear what the end goal is. Is that perhaps because the end goal for the U.S. is not necessarily the end goal for Israel?
Well, I do think it's true that there's a divergence. I think Israel certainly wants regime change, whereas the United States is willing to be happy with destroying the nuclear program and then having personnel rotation, which they've achieved. The ballistic missiles and the Navy of Iran have also been effectively destroyed. And so the U.S. is closer to a point where they can say that they've sufficiently deterred Iran from behavior that they weren't liking over the last 40 years.
Okay, so they weren't liking, but are Americans supportive of their motivation here? Donald Trump had mentioned an imminent threat to America. Some were saying the nuclear programs were far from that, especially after the hits last June. Do Americans support the message around this?
It seems very partisan, as with so many things in the U.S. You have about 40% that do approve of the war, maybe 50% disapprove. But the numbers in the polls tend to be fairly closely in line with the core base of support for the Republican Party versus the base of support for the Democratic Party. And when you ask about the nuclear program, that tends to shift the polls a little bit in favor of the president. So in other words, there was a long-term risk of a nuclear-armed Iran backed by Russia and China, and Americans sort of understand that the U.S. needed to prevent that from happening, but there was not an imminent threat. And so there is a lot of hesitation because we've had some long and deleterious wars in the Middle East and in South Asia over the past 2 decades.
Yeah, Americans, I know, did not support sort of boots on the ground initiatives. Gas prices are also a sensitive issue for consumers. They're spiking here. Have they moved up there?
Yeah, the gasoline price is actually moving up, although, you know, with the latest moves in oil and with Kuwait as well as Iraq shuttering in their production and the Strait of Hormuz remaining closed, you can sort of anticipate that there will be a continued effect. You'd have to have a sustained oil price well above $90 per barrel to translate to the gasoline price getting to $4 per gallon in the U.S., which is sort of the political period where people really would break their opinions of Trump. You'd start to see his approval rating sink down into the 30% range. And that would be a disaster ahead of the midterm election. So it does suggest that the president is getting closer to declaring victory and trying to resume negotiations rather than creating irreparable economic harm.
You mentioned it'd have to get closer to $4 a gallon. Where are they around now?
Oh, I mean, anywhere from $3.20 to $3.50, I would say. I mean, it really depends on where you are.
Okay, so how quickly will Washington have to move as that gas price edges up?
I mean, I think he's going to be moving now. So, for example, when the president gives a very harsh claim, you know, quoting Ulysses S. Grant, the U.S. demands unconditional surrender, what he's saying is he's going to pressure the negotiations sooner in order to try to either shift his rhetoric over the weekend or sometime next week, because with one more week of the type of behavior we're seeing in the Middle East, and you'll see the oil spike above $100 per barrel, and you'll get a lot more panicking in global markets, and you'll get a lot of downstream impacts, and it'll just be harder and harder to manage.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the downstream, because energy prices are one thing. Where do you see this rippling to? What other supply chains, for example, could be affected?
Well, generally speaking, all forms of fuel are going to use this crude oil as their inputs, but you also see that aluminum has been impacted. You see fertilizer, both from natural gas as well as inputs to fertilizer. And you can also have a range of other goods affected. So it's it's a supply shock, and it does cross different layers of the economy. But the really key thing is crude oil, because it's just such an essential good, and it translates to so many other types of production.
You mentioned, of course, it's a midterm year, so clearly they would have to move faster this year than they do in other years. It feels like it's already a tight timeline. It's March, and the midterms are in the fall. Is that already a tight timeline for the president to get out of some of this mess?
Oh, yeah, extremely tight timeline. I mean, voters typically make up their minds in the summertime. July, August, a lot of voter opinion has been formulated already. And so if you have a price spike that occurs in March, you have to get that price spike down by Memorial Day, end of May, so that people can start having a good summer. Otherwise, they're going to be very resentful because they'll be paying higher prices, whether it's for food or fuel or just for getting by in life. Shelter, of course, is an issue. So really, it was a huge gamble. And the United States and Israel believed that they had a strategic opportunity that they had to take because Israel and the U.S. saw that Iran was extremely vulnerable. But the timing was not great for the president, given the midterm election.
All right, Matt, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for your time. Matt Gertken with the latest on the conflict and what it means for Americans. Thanks for that.